So, uh, good morning, Namo Buddhaya to everyone. And bear with me, the audio or the video goes a little crazy, wonky, because the connection that I have is not very stable. Yeah. It's not a proper broadband connection. I'm just using the phone line. Anyway, so let's begin our session. So we're starting with the third module in this Buddhism happiness series. So the third module is negative emotions and toxic environments, and the first two sessions in that module are how to heal anger and how to deal with fear and anxiety. So those are the two models. Because they're related, I thought I'll combine and discuss the two in today's session. So before we proceed with our discussion, it would be nice to just settle down and calm our minds and still all the chatter in the minds, and develop some concentration, which will help us focus on the session and set a good motivation for this session. And maybe just do a prayer to remove the obstacles to our spiritual development. So let's do a short meditation. We'll do mindfulness meditation, mindfulness of body, mindfulness of breath, or anapanasmriti, it's called. So just adopt a good posture. The 7-point Vairocana posture would be ideal. Cross-legged, full Padmasana. And if you're sitting in a chair, then just ensure that back is erect, shoulders straight, arms relaxed. Left palm holding the right palm, and tip of the thumbs touching each other. And head or the chin slightly tucked in, tip of the tongue resting against the roof of the mouth, against the upper row of, behind the upper row of teeth. And you could either keep your eyes open or half open or closed. Depends what you're comfortable with. If you feel distracted, maybe you can start off by just keeping your eyes closed. If they're half open, then you can direct the gaze down the ridge of your nose in the space in front of you. So just compose yourself, and then bring the focus of your mind to the area between the tip of your nose and the upper lip, and observe the sensations as you breathe in and breathe out in that area. Then it's quite subtle, so you'll have to be very mindful. Now bring the focus of your mind to your in-breath. Just observe which nostril you're breathing in through, and observe the sensations that you experience as you breathe in. Now bring the focus of your mind to your out breath and observe which nostril you are breathing out through, and observe the sensations in that nostril. Keep your breathing normal. Don't force it. Maybe at the start, you could just mm, breathe in with a little more intensity, or with a little more force, and then breathe out with a little more force. And then um, when you're able to identify the in breath and the out breath, which nostril and all that, then you can fall back to your regular uh, unforced breathing. Now let's just use the aid of counting to help us with concentration. So as you breathe in, just count 1, 1, and as you breathe out, count 2, 2, alternate till 10, and then start over again. So now with your mind sufficiently focused, concentrated, and let's just reflect on the optimum human rebirth that we've been blessed with in this lifetime. Just reflect on the freedoms and the endowments that characterize our life in this birth. Now, and also reflect on the 9 point uh, meditation on the mindfulness of death, and realize that death is inevitable, but the timing of death is uncertain, and which means that there's a possibility that we could die, maybe even today or tomorrow. So, at the time of death, we'll be separated from these favorable conditions, the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, and there's no guarantee that we'll have access to these freedoms and endowments in our next lifetime. Um, at the time of death, we because we haven't advanced in our spiritual practice so much, we won't have the freedom to choose our rebirth in our next lifetime, and it's possible that we will be reborn in one of the lower realms, and we'll have to endure a lot of pain and suffering in the lower realms. Or even by chance, if we are reborn in the human realm or the realm of gods, it's quite uh, rare. But even in that case, we know that there's a lot of suffering in the human realm. There's the suffering of birth, there's the suffering of aging, sickness, and dying, and also a lot of mental anguish and frustration, anxiety, disappointment, depression that we experience in our life. Even in the realm of gods, the suffering, especially when they realize that their lifespan uh, has exhausted, has been exhausted, and they're going to fall back into one of the lower realms. So there's no place in samsara which is free of suffering, whether it's the lower realms or the higher realms. They're all characterized by suffering. So there's nothing trustworthy about samsara. And yet, at this in this lifetime, we've been blessed with the freedoms and the endowments, and we have uh, access to uh, the doctrine that the great teacher, the Shakyamuni Buddha, taught. And we've been blessed with the good intelligence which we can use to discriminate different kinds of phenomena. We can um realize, recognize the flaws of samsara and the benefits of liberating ourselves from this cycle of birth and death in samsara. So we should all, therefore, aspire for liberation. But individual liberation is not a sufficient spiritual goal, because we'll leave behind uh, all the other sentient beings uh, in samsara will continue to suffer uh, from the effects of the negative karma that they've accumulated in the past. So all these sentient beings have been kind to us in the past. So we should find a way to repay the kindness. And the best way to repay the kindness is to lead them out of this cycle of suffering in samsara, lead them on the path to liberation. But at the moment, we do not have a meaningful capacity to help them. Uh, and in order to have that capacity, uh, we need to attain the state of a completely enlightened Buddha who has perfect realizations and also has a specific ability which is called upaya kaushal, uh, skillful means. And based on skillful means, he can uh, show the path towards liberation to people with different kinds of dispositions and spiritual maturities. So we should all aim to attain a similar kind of state, um, and hence we should all aspire for the state of omniscience. But we need some assistance on this path towards omniscience. So the assistance will come through the three jewels. So the jewel of Buddha, the teacher who's shown us the path, the jewel of Dharma, the path itself, the scriptures and the realizations in the mind streams of realized practitioners, and the jewel of Sangha, who will guide us, who will assist us on the path, who are practicing the path themselves, and by force of their insights, they can guide us better on the path. So let us therefore take refuge in these three jewels with a short refuge prayer. So Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. So with the three jewels visualized in the space in front of you, mentally just visualize the three jewels, and also visualize that the entire space is filled with you and copies of yourself, and make prostrations to the three jewels, make full length prostrations, full prostrations, and then also imagine that the entire space in the universe is filled with precious offerings, beautiful offerings, and make these offerings to the three jewels. Also confess all the negativities, the transgressions and infractions you have committed. And then also rejoice in the merit that both you and other sentient beings have created in the three times have created in the past, will create in the future, and are in the process of creating right now. So just rejoice in all that merit that is being created, in the process of being created, has been created, and will be created. And then plead with the Buddhas to not pass into nirvana and continue to turn the wheel of Dharma and continue to show us the path. And also dedicate all the merit that you accumulated to the generation and the enhancement of the mind of enlightenment in your mind stream. So we'll just recite the Bodhicitta prayer. So I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. So by my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I'll just recite the Heart Sutra to remove obstacles to our practice. So, Nama Sarvajnaya. Evam Shrudamekasmin Samay Bhagwan Rajagriha Viharati Sma Grudukute Parvate. Mata Bhikshu Sangena Sadharma Mata cha Bodhisattva Sangena Tena Kalu Samena Bhagwan Gambhira Sambodham Nama Samadhim Samapanna Tena cha Samena Aryavalteshvara Bodhisattva Sata Gambhirayam Pradnyaparmitayam Charyam Charmana Evam Vyolokiti Sma Panchaskandastanta Svabhavashunyana Vyolokiti Atashmana Shariputra Buddhanubhavena Aryavalteshvaram Bodhisattva Metadvochade Kashin Kulaputra Gambhirayam Pradnyaparmitayam Charyam Chartakama Kadam Shikshitavya Eva Mukti Aryavalteshvara Bodhisattva Mahatva Aishamantam Shariputam Vochada Yakashin Shariputa Kulaputra Vakuludhita Vasama Gambhirayama Pradnaparmitayama Charyama Chartakama Teneva Vyolokitavya Panchaskandastanta Svavashunyana Samanupashati Isma Rupam Shunyata Shunyata Eva Rupam Rupana Pratak Shunyata Shunyata Anapratak Rupam Yad Rupam Sa Shunyata Ya Shunyata Tad Rupam Evam Vedna Sanya Sanskara Vidnyanani Cha Shunyata Evam Shariputa Sarvadharma Shunyata Lakshana Anutpanna Niruddha Amla Amla Vimla Anuna Sampurna Tasmat Tarishariputa Shunyata Amna Rupam Na Vedna Na Sanyana Sanskar Na Vidnyanam Na Chakshu Na Shrotam Na Granam Na Jivana Kayo Na Mano Na Rupam Na Shabdo Na Gandho Na Raso Na Sprashtavyam Na Dharmam Na Chakshu Dhatur Yavan Na Mano Dhatur Na Dharma Dhatur Na Mano Vidnyana Dhatur Na Vidya Na Kshaya Yavan Na Jaramarna Na Jaramarna Kshaya Na Dukha Samudaya Nirodha Marga Na Jnanam Na Praptir Tasmat Tarishariputra Praptitvena Bodhisattvana प्रज्ञापारमिताश्रित्य विहरति चित्तावरणस्थित्वादतरसो विपर्यासति क्रांतो निष्ठ निर्वाण त्रयदो विस्तृत सर्वबुद्धा प्रज्ञापारमिताश्रित्य अनुत्तराम सम्य संबोधिमपि संबुद्धाः तस्मादन्यातव्य प्रज्ञापारमिता महामन्त्र अनुत्तर मंत्र सम सम मंत्र सर्वदुःख प्रशमन मंत्र सत्यमित्यत्वाद प्रज्ञापारमिता मुक्त मंत्र तत्तागते गते पारसंगते बोधि स्वाहा तत्तागते गते पारसंगते बोधि स्वाहा तत्तागते गते पारसंगते बोधि स्वाहा एवं शारिपुत्र गंभीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्यायाम शिक्षितव्यं बोधिसत्त्वेन तकुल भगवान् तस्मात् समाधिर्भूताय आर्यावलुप्तेश्वरस्य बोधिसत्त्वस्य साधु कर्मदात साधु साधु कुलपुत्र एवमेतद् कुलपुत्र एवमेतद् गंभीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्यां चर्तव्यं यथा निर्दिष्टमनुमोद्यते तथागतिर्हद्भिः इदं वोच भगवान् आनन्दमनायुष्यमान् शारिपुत्र आर्यावलुप्तेश्वरश्च बोधिसत्त्वसाच सर्वावति परिषत्सदेमानुषसूरगन्धर्वश्च लोको भगवतो भाषितम् अभिनन्दने इति प्रज्ञापारमिता हृदय सूत्रम समाप्तम. Okay, let's begin our discussion now. So, healing anger and dealing with fear and anxiety. So let's deal with the first part, how to heal anger. And these three emotions, they're quite closely connected, related. So we'll explore what the connections, what the relationships are. And then, as I said, we'll start off by trying to figure out how to heal anger. So to do that, we'll follow this flow. We'll look at the destructive effects of anger, the flaws of developing anger. And then we'll try and identify what would be a good antidote to deal with anger. So the antidote is patience or tolerance. So we'll see what the beneficial effects of tolerance and patience are. And then we'll see what are the steps that we can deploy to overcome anger, and then look at reasoning techniques to cultivate patience and tolerance. So this is the first part. So let's, before we identify the specific antidote of anger, just let's look at the relationship between fear and anger. So or do you have any definition of fear and anger, and do you have any idea about the relationship between fear and anger? How do you define fear? How do you define anger? And um, what's the relationship between the two? Any suggestions? What is fear and what is anger? What is the nature of fear? What is the nature of anger? Any suggestions?
Self-cherishing.
Self-cherishing. Okay, self-cherishing can be a cause which then manifests these two negative emotions. What exactly is the identity of these emotions, the negative emotions? So in both cases, you'll find that some aspect of our personal safety is threatened. So fear is generated in response to that threat, and anger also is kind of generated in response to that threat. So we'll look at the specifics of this threat, but fundamentally, it's this perceived or maybe even an actual threat to our safety. And we'll also see what are the aspects of the safety that's being threatened. So fear and anger, as it says here, arise when we perceive a threat to our, or 1 second, minimize this window. So we perceive a threat to our or those who fall in the extended arc of mind, the safety of either our own safety or the safety of those we cherish or our beloved ones. So that safety could be related to our material resources, uh, financial resources, physical resources, uh, and safety could relate to our own physical well-being or our emotional well-being. So both fear and anger is a response to this kind of a threat. And there is a definite relationship between fear and anger. So fear can trigger anger, as the slide says here. For example, we all have terror bosses. We worked in environments where only the lucky ones have pliant bosses. So in case you have a terror boss, you fear walking into his cabin whenever he or she summons you. And it's possible that gradually that fear that you have of your superior, of your boss, takes on the form of anger towards that person. So we might feel anger in response to a fear to our bosses. Then there could be specific kind of situations. For example, you're driving on a road and suddenly somebody cuts into your lane. And it's a very dangerous situation. You have to apply the brakes. Even in that situation, of course, you're trying to deal with the threat to your personal physical safety first. And once that threat, that fear has subsided, maybe that fear gives rise to anger to the person who is, cut into your lane while driving on a highway. So that's another example of how fear can trigger anger. Then this we are in today's environment, we live in environments where contagious diseases are widespread. So when there's fear of serious illness from diseases like dengue or COVID-19, um, that fear kind of morphs into some sort of anger towards the source uh, that brings those illnesses. So the pathogens, the viruses, the bacteria that bring these kind of serious illnesses. So this also is an example where fear could trigger anger. And then fear of financial pressure. So you are in a business, you work, you're collaborating in a business with your business partner, and then you're responsible for the financials of the organization, but your business partner, does not. Uh, he kind of has a very loose attitude towards financial um, discipline, and he engages in very wasteful, financially wasteful activities, and you feel this uh, because you're responsible for the financial health of the organization, and you feel this fear of financial pressure. But then it also kind of leads to anger being generated towards the business partner that you're working with. So this is also an example of how fear can trigger anger. So both fear and trigger, they have similar kind of characteristics. They're triggered by a threat uh, and generated in response. This flight or freeze response that we have, this inherent flight or freeze response that we have in response to the threat. So fear and anger take on the shape of that response, and they trigger similar kind of physiological reactions, very similar physiological reactions. So the demeanor, your physical demeanor kind of alters in a very similar way. Your facial expression gets altered, blood pressure, heart rate, pulse, everything. The symptoms that manifest when you manifest fear and or anger, they're very similar. So both fear and anger trigger our threat system or physiological reactions associated with the fight or flight or freeze response. And fear and anger, they're physiologically very similar, as I said just now, with virtually the same effects on the uh, nervous system with respect to the um, heart, cardiovascular functions, with our respiratory systems, and also the symptoms that manifest on our skin and the electrodermal measures. So you have all these kind of physiological similarities also of when fear and anger manifest. So they're related. One can trigger the other. Can anger trigger fear? Anyone? Can anger be the cause for fear? Can you think about a situation where anger triggers fear?
Maybe us acting up on fear might, us acting up on anger might trigger fear because we may fear the reaction of whatever we've done in anger or out of anger.
Right. Yeah. So the object that you are directing to our anger towards, uh, we're not entirely sure how that anger would be received. Expression of anger would be received, and we kind of have some apprehension about the response from the other party. So yeah, in that sense, anger can trigger fear. Yeah. So yeah. So these are the characteristics of fear and anger, and the relationship between fear and anger. And generally speaking, you can think about anger having this nature, where it is said to be an emotion that is characterized by hostility, and it is triggered by frustration. So we look at the causal process for anger arising in a moment. But this is kind of a definition of anger. So it's an emotion that is characterized by hostility that comes from frustration. The frustration could be real or it could be imagined. And the hostility could come from injury by some other person or some perceived injustice. Fear, on the other hand, is an emotion that is aroused by sensing some sort of imminent threat. The threat is, of course, clear and present. So in that sense, it is slightly different to anxiety. So we'll see the difference between anxiety and fear in a moment. So here, fear is an emotion that is aroused by detecting an imminent threat, and it involves an immediate kind of almost reflex alarm reaction that incites the fight or flight or freeze physiological response. So there are these three kinds of responses that we tend to exhibit: either fight, the source of fear, or pull back from the source of fear, or we just get paralyzed in the light of in front of when faced with that source of fear. So this is the definition of fear and anger. So in terms of nature, they're different, but they're related and can have a mutual causal kind of relationship. So let's deal with anger first. And what are the different kinds of affiliate negative emotions that arise in a mind stream which belong to the class of anger? So I've just listed them here. Anger, or in some texts, it's also kind of translated as repugnance. The Sanskrit word is pratig. So anger or repugnance, then there's belligerence, there's rancor or resentment, there's malice or spite. So all these are kind of variants of malice. And then there's harmfulness or violence, and then there's hatred, envy, and pride. So these are all kind of afflictions that belong to the anger affiliate class. And then on the other side, I've listed the antidotes that can be deployed to deal with the anger affiliate affliction. So there's forgiveness, there's patience or tolerance, which is the main antidote, the source antidote. So we'll look at how to develop this antidote in to develop some sort of a framework, a mechanism to deal with anger. And then there's absence of hatred, harmlessness, and then the other mental states of compassion, loving kindness, or bodhicitta. These are also antidotes to anger and anger affiliate afflictions. So anger or repugnance, it's a malice, and a malice that sees the three objects of the observation of anger. The sources could be the sentient beings. The source of anger could be our own suffering, some physical suffering that we have, and the source of that physical suffering that we have. So the malice sees all these sources. Malice cannot tolerate these sources, these three objects of anger, and it wishes to harm them. So that is the nature of anger. So there's this wish to harm the objects of anger, the objects of observation of anger. Could be sentient beings, one's own suffering, or the sources of suffering. And it has the characteristic of malice, or some sort of ill will. And the function that it delivers is that it acts as a support for misconducts, different kinds of misconduct. And we'll see that when we look at the other afflictions. So there's belligerence. Again, it is a malice. It is a malice when the cause of harm abides nearby. And it is a malice that is involved with anger, of course. Belligerence is involved with anger. And it manifests when the cause of harm is physically proximate. And it has the function of acting as a support for taking up weapons, punishing, and so forth, and preparing to injure others. So the source of anger is in physical proximity, and belligerence then acts as a support for the taking up of weapons with the intent to injure the source of anger. So that's belligerence, and then there's resentment. Resentment is a refusal to let go of thoughts of harm. So in case of belligerence, you have manifested the thought of harm. Resentment actually persists with that thought of harm. So it is a refusal to let go of thoughts of harm following belligerence, and is involved with anger, of course. And it has the function of acting as a support for intolerance. So it kind of enhances your attitude of intolerance. Then the spite, it is a malicious mind that is preceded by belligerence and resentment, again involved with anger, and it has a specific function. The function is that it acts as a support for harsh speech or rough, violent speech, to increase that which is non-meritorious. So it manifests in the form of harsh or violent speech. So that's spite. And then there's harmfulness involved with anger. So harmfulness is non-benevolence, non-compassion, non-mercy to the source of anger. So it's kind of an enhanced, more destructive form of resentment. So you persist with that intention to harm the source of anger, and it takes on this form of non-compassion, non-mercy, non-benevolence. It doesn't want to kind of forgive the source of anger, and it has a function of harming others. Hatred is a very intense form of the malice that defines anger, belligerence, etc. So it is a malice with regard to sentient beings suffering and the sources of suffering, and has the function of acting as a support for engagement in misconduct. Hatred is ill will that can have no virtue. It poisons one's interactions with fellow beings. So hatred, as opposed to anger, anger in some instances can have some sort of positive aspect to it, but hatred is pure evil. It's pure negative. It has no virtue. And then there are other affiliate afflictions like envy and pride, which also contribute to manifestation of anger. So envy is an angry thought in a person who desires gains and honors, and it is part of hatred aroused by intolerance for the welfare of others. So it functions by its function is mostly to arouse affliction and a state of uneasiness. So jealousy, the person desires gains and honors. Somebody else is blessed with these gains and honors, and envy manifests as ill will towards that person, as anger towards that person, as hatred towards that person. So in general, it is intolerant towards the advancement or the welfare of the other person. So that's envy. And pride also can act as a cause for the manifestation of these kinds of malices. So it has the function of acting as a support for disrespect and suffering. So if we are disrespectful of the other party, then there's every likelihood that it might manifest. It may take on, that disrespect might take on the form of one of these malices. So these are the anger affiliate afflictions. And I was just mentioning the causal flow of anger. So this is the general flow, the causal flow that leads to anger. So it starts off with some sort of mental discomfort that you experience. So let's say, abuses and insults have been hurled at you in the boss's cabin. He's humiliated you, and or somebody scolded you. Your parents have scolded you. So there's this pervasive kind of underlying sense of dissatisfaction. It may not manifest immediately, not kind of become manifest at the conscious level immediately, but there's this underlying sense of dissatisfaction or mental discomfort. And that then, yeah, Shagun?
Hi. Yeah, that's really venerable. Venerable, could you also explain why envy and pride are affiliates of anger? I mean, I understand, but there might not be any ill will towards the other person. There could be more from a perspective of that a person feels I am more superior, but there might not be an angle of, a lot of ill will. There could be and there might not be. Is it a causal kind of relationship, or how they are connected, the pride and the envy part towards anger? Or they're just connected? So just wanted to understand more.
As you said, pride may or may not kind of trigger an ill will towards the other person. In a similar manner, envy also may or may not trigger ill will towards other person. So, as I said, it has the potential to trigger this ill will, and in that sense, they're connected. But not strictly a cause. But in instances where it has triggered, then you can think about envy and pride as a cause for this for anger or whatever malice is being manifested. So, for example, your neighbor gets a new car, and of course, you also desire to possess that kind of a car, and then you manifest this jealous mind or envy in your mind, uh, and then there's some sense of discomfort in your mind. Then you interact with the neighbor, and the neighbor also is very boastful about the fact that he's got this car and you don't, and he keeps reminding you about that. So that mental discomfort is there. It was already there at the time when the a person purchased the car, uh, and now he's kind of causing that mental discomfort to strengthen further. And as the mental discomfort then strength, because it's hurting you, it's hurting you because of whatever interpretation you have about that episode, but also because the other person is making sure that he reminds you that I own the car and you don't. So he's also contributing to this enhancement of the mental discomfort. And as this chart here is showing, that mental discomfort then kind of takes on this form of hurt. So the person, you have manifested this jealousy, and the jealousy has taken on this form of this mental discomfort. And then you start feeling hurt because you start feeling lesser in comparison to the your neighbor. Yeah. And you are also kind of being made aware of the fact that you do not have access to the same kind of pleasure as the neighbor has. So the chart here says that we feel this hurt because we're being treated unfairly and against our expectations in our pursuit of the eight worldly concerns. So in this instance, we are deprived of some sort of pleasure, the pleasure of possessing that car, and being made aware of that, deficiency, that we don't own that car and the neighbor owns that car. So deprivation of pleasure, of course, and the sense of I. Now your I is kind of diminished as compared to the neighbor. Both these things are being challenged, and that mental discomfort then takes on the form of intense hurt, and then that hurt then kind of takes on the form of frustration. Frustration is taking on that mental discomfort, taking that hurt feeling, and then nourishing it, massaging it to a state where the conditions are just ripe enough for that those feelings to outwardly manifest, to express outwardly. So the conditions are set for the immediate outburst of anger with frustration when things do not go the way we wish. So in this example that we are looking at, the neighbor persists with boasting about the possession of the car. And then at some point, because of this pent up hurt and pent up mental discomfort that you've been having, it takes on the form of frustration. and the person has been repeatedly reminding you about what you lack and what he possesses. And then in one such moment, then you let it go. You release all that pent up mental discomfort, and it takes on the form of anger. So anger then manifests, but internally, how do we perceive this anger? We perceive it as some sort of a protector or a savior. In what sense? Because your sense of I has been hurt, the anger that manifests, you see that anger as some sort of a friend that will help you in your battle to kind of take revenge against the source of that anger. So anger is seen as a protector that will help us in our battle to take revenge against the person who inflicts the harm. So this is the general flow of anger. So envy and pride could also kind of be at the root of this flow. So you could have an additional element here before the first stage of mental discomfort, the stage of envy or pride. And you can think about different situations where pride could then trigger this causal sequence. Yeah, Shagun, is that, I mean, does that answer your question?
Yes, Venerable. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so let's proceed then. So what are the flaws of manifesting anger? So there are physical consequences, of course. So we are aware of the physical consequences. So harboring anger is physically harmful. There are all kinds of stress hormones that are released when a person gets angry. Excessive release of these chemicals, these hormones, can lead to all kinds of problems. They can lead to intense stress and anxiety. And of course, it also leads to dampening of our creative energies. So, harboring anger is physically harmful. Uh, and as we had seen uh, from that discussion on the affiliate class, harboring anger can lead to more intense forms of malice. So anger over time gets reinforced through repetitive engagement. The more you engage in episodes which manifest anger from your side, uh, the more likely that it's going to trigger some of the more intense forms of malice. So anger can give birth to more intense malice in the form of stronger anger affiliate afflictions like spite, harmfulness, hatred, and then if you keep uh, the anger lingering in your mind stream, uh, and you let go of your anger, release it, uh, it's possible that that instant of anger can destroy a lot of positive merit that you accumulated through your wholesome actions in the past. So yeah, this is something that keeps being mentioned, is mentioned very frequently in our texts. So one of the biggest dangers of manifesting anger is that it's possible that the person you are generating the anger towards happens to be a more spiritually realized being. And in that case, because the basis is superior to you, um, you will end up just destroying or erasing some of the merit that you accumulated from the past. Yeah, Alice has a question. Yeah.
Hi, Venerable. Yes, I just wanted to ask, in one of the previous sessions, you mentioned that anger destroys merits created through virtue, but not through wisdom, something like that. I have not heard that mentioned before, so if you could just elaborate a little bit on that, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah. So merit comes through the. So you engage in the. Uh, you practice the six paramitas. Um, so the first five paramitas and the last one, the paramita of wisdom. So both lead to accumulation of merit. Uh, So the destruction of merit that we are speaking of here is the first kind of merit. If anger manifests, then it's the first kind of merit that is affected, that can be compromised, not the merit that one accumulates through the practice of the sixth perfection, wisdom. It doesn't have any kind of negative impact on the merit that comes through wisdom. It's mostly in the form of enhanced insights. So that accumulation of merit is not compromised through anger that you could manifest. Yeah, that's something that you'd mentioned in one of the previous sessions. Yeah.
Thank you.
So an instant of anger can destroy positive imprints created over 1,000 eons. So what are the steps to deal with anger then? Of course, we start off with Shagun.
Yeah, Venerable, and I'm sure this is highly discussed as well, right? Like how a single instant of anger can eradicate so many virtues, right, of 1,000 eons. So why it is said so? I know Bodhisattva Shantideva, he starts in his book as well, uh, maybe a little bit more reasoning to it, how just a single instant of anger has the power to eradicate eons of virtues, and why it is said so.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's mostly in relation to the basis that the anger is directed towards. So there's extensive discussion on that. So if the basis is equal, then also you kind of compromise your merit. But if the basis is highly superior to in terms of the realizations and the merits that that person has, then it talks about vast amounts of merits getting erased. Uh, but yeah, how exactly, why exactly? Again, yeah, it's the thing that maybe we need to explore. But generally speaking, it's mentioned that depending on the differences in the basis against basis in relation to whom the anger is generated, you have this difference. But yeah, it's a good question. Why would you erase eons worth of your merit if you generated that merit in relation to your spiritual guru, uh, and as opposed to another person? Um, See, one reason would be is that if you're generating, this anger towards your spiritual guru, for example, it just means that your practice of guru devotion is not sound enough. Um, See, of course, the anger that you're manifesting is because of some sort of distorted thinking on your part. You kind of look at some situation and you identify that as a flaw with your spiritual guru, and then you build on that interpretation, and then let that interpretation manifest uh, as anger. So it's said that all the good qualities that you develop, including realizations on the wisdom front, are all because of the kindness of your spiritual guru. And if you manifest these kind of malicious states, mental states, uh, with the spiritual guru as the basis of that anger, then it just means that that guru devotion, that your guru devotion is not strong enough, that your faith is not strong enough, uh, and hence it kind of leads to compromise of your merit. Merit in the sense that it does not destroy whatever you accumulated. So, for example, if you accumulated merit to you know obtain fortunate rebirth in the future lifetime, or maybe in the next lifetime, then due to this uh, action of yours where you generated anger towards your spiritual guru, it's possible that that event gets postponed for a long time. You do not have the benefit of a fortunate rebirth in the immediate next lifetime, but kind of gets postponed to some future lifetime, several lifetimes later. So in that sense, the merit is getting compromised. It doesn't get compromised in the sense that it's completely erased. So yeah, that is something that you need to be aware of. It doesn't get completely wiped out. The positive effects of the merit that you accumulated, those could be compromised, could become less significant, could be delayed or postponed. That's how the compromise of merit needs to be understood. It doesn't completely get erased. Yeah, so maybe you could think about it in those terms.
Venerable, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know how to raise hands in this gadget, so I'm interfering. So my understanding, I just want to make clear whether I have understood this properly. As I meditate on this about merits and how the merits, get, erased due to our bad actions. I was I was reflecting that, for me to develop a healthy mind, or to walk towards bodhicitta, it's a long journey. It takes a lot of time. But with anger or any negative emotions, the same state of mind can be distracted in no time. So now, if anger can erase our merits, can I logically think in a way that, to be worthy of merits, I should be worthy of merits. Like, even if I've accumulated a lot of merits all through my lifetime, I must have, that kind of state of mind which makes me worthy of the merits. If I lose it, then I lose the merits.
Sorry.
Is it like that?
No, see, it's possible that we engage in some sort of an unwholesome action, takes on the form of generating anger towards another being. But it shouldn't imply that your ability to manifest these positive mental states like bodhicitta that you were referring to, a mind of awakening, that gets compromised entirely. That's not the case. You can always engage in actions of purification. So in that moment, you lost your composure and you let anger manifest, come through. But you realize that you made a mistake later on, and then you engage in appropriate kind of purification practices, and you can ensure that the negative result of that action does not manifest later on. So
Thank you.
just because you've lost composure, manifested anger, or any of the other negative mental states, and based on those mental states you engaged in unwholesome actions, and based on those unwholesome actions you create a negative energy in the form of negative karma, it doesn't mean that your ability to manifest positive states in the future gets completely compromised, entirely compromised. You can always engage in purification practices. In fact, we should be very aware of this. We have engaged in transgressions, many transgressions in the past, and also we'll do that in the future also. Even at this moment, we're not all free of these tendency to engage in unwholesome deeds. So every now and then we're going to kind of transgress some vows, transgress some commitments. So we should be aware that there is this possibility that we can engage in purification practice and then make sure that the seed that you planted through your unwholesome action is just left kind of incapable of manifesting a fruit. That can be done through purification practice. And yesterday we had discussed some of the purification practices that we could engage in. Okay, so we'll just complete this slide and then maybe break for 5 minutes and then continue the discussion later. So steps to deal with anger. you start with, of course, the right motivation. Motivation triggers enthusiasm, motivation to avoid anger and hatred. So you realize the drawbacks of generating anger. So you reflect on the destructive nature of anger first. Uh, the most serious one is that virtues accumulated over eons get destroyed by a single instant of anger. And destruction here, as I said, is maybe a postponement of um, the positive results, uh, or maybe compromise in the form or shape that that positive result takes on. Yeah, so it's not complete erasing of the merits. So virtues accumulated over eons can get destroyed by a single instant of anger. Only meritorious virtues through giving, ethical conduct, etc., get destroyed, not wisdom virtues. So this is the point that Alice was referring to. Uh, so wisdom is accumulated. Wisdom virtues are accumulated through insights into reality and through meditation. The other drawback, of course, is anger is a great obstacle to enhance bodhicitta, point that Lavanya was referring to. And then anger destroys your composure. Anger destroys factors that we consider central to our happiness. It, uh, it destroys our physical health. It destroys material possessions. It leads to friends and companions, getting annoyed with you and then breaking their relationship with you. So, because these three things is compromised, these three things are very central to our happiness, and hence anger can have that effect. It can destroy factors that we consider are central to our happiness, and then anger destroys our composure. So our physical composure is compromised. The best part of our brain kind of gets compromised when you get angry. The ability to judge what is right or wrong and make assessments of long-term and short-term uh, consequences, that gets compromised. And anger kind of triggers this urge to seek revenge. And we know that revenge has no immediate benefit, and also is harmful in the long run. So we think about all these destructive um, uh, characteristics of anger, and based on this understanding of these flaws, drawbacks of generating anger, then we can enhance our enthusiasm to avoid anger. So that would be the first step. Yeah. So that's the first steps, and then having generated that kind of enthusiasm, then we then ensure that we cultivate the right kind of antidote that attacks anger. So that would be tolerance and patience. So we'll look at that uh, after maybe a 5 minute break. Yeah, Shanti, would that be okay now?
Yes, Kaldanla.
So we'll break for 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay,
Now.
sure. And we meet at 11:20?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yes, Venerable, we're ready.
Okay, so we saw some of the drawbacks of generating anger, and Shagun raised a very interesting point. So, should it matter that the anger? Why should the basis in relation to whom the anger is generated? Why should that matter in terms of estimating the negative impact of the manifesting anger? So, we we also know that there's in the discussion of the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, there's a mention of the 5 inexpiable sins. So if you cause a physical injury to Buddha, physical person of Buddha, then it leads to immediate retribution through rebirth in the worst kind of hells in the next lifetime. So, any kind of negativity that you generate towards in relation to a superior being, it has a more enhanced negative impact, creates enormously negative karma. Here, when we spoke of generating anger towards your spiritual guru, for example, so one thing, of course, is that your practice of guru devotion has not evolved that much. And let's say anger is an outward manifestation, outward expression of your internal mental interpretation of some event, right? And then you identify some situation, identify some flaw in your guru, and you express your anger outwardly. Maybe it's visible to other people also. And because of that expression of anger, it's possible that the other people might get influenced, and their practice also gets compromised. Their practice of guru devotion also gets compromised, and then that kind of has an impact on the guru's ability to. I mean, he has this ability to benefit vast amounts of disciples, vast numbers of disciples. Because of your expression of anger towards him, it's possible that you're kind of compromising that ability of the guru by influencing other people also, because it's an outward visible expression of anger. And your guru, through his action, through his bodhisattva actions, is able to create so much merit, so much positive energy, and that gets compromised because of your foolish expression of anger. And whatever merit that the guru would have created, whatever is getting compromised, to that extent, your merit also probably gets compromised. And the compromise here, as I said, is not complete elimination of the merit. The destruction of merit has to be thought about in terms of postponement of the positive effects, or maybe diminishing of the positive effects. Okay, so let's proceed. Just look at the antidotes for anger. So tolerance is mentioned as the main principal antidote to anger. So what is tolerance or patience? So it's a resolute response against adversity. So adversity could be any anything in the environment that you're not comfortable with, you dislike, and it stems from a settled temperament. Somebody provokes you, that's the adversity. Your response is very resolute, and it's caused by a settled temperament, which is not agitated, not perturbed by either internal or external disturbance. So that's kind of the definition of patience, and it has these 3 characteristics of patience. So there are these 3 characteristics of patience. There's tolerance towards the injuries from others, when people provoke you and probably injure you, maybe even physically. A tolerance is generated in relation to those injuries from others. And tolerance is based on a voluntary acceptance of pain, hardships, and suffering. So that's the principal causal factor that leads to tolerance. And it also is a result of your having reflected on the nature of reality. So these are the three aspects of patience. So let's look at these three aspects. So how to cultivate patience or tolerance. The first one, you develop tolerance based on a conscious voluntary acceptance of pain or hardships or suffering. So you enhance your pain thresholds in a way. That's what tolerance is implying here. Enhancing of our pain thresholds. And that can be done by reflecting on these things, on these aspects of reality. So our environment has many more factors and conditions that can trigger pain and suffering in our lives. And there are fewer conditions that can give rise to pleasure or joy and happiness. So these are comparatively rare. So there are more factors that can trigger pain and suffering in our environment. And we need to be aware that suffering is a part of our reality. It's the when the Buddha spoke of the the Four Noble Truths, he spoke of the truth of suffering first. So this is something that is a central aspect of our existence. And it's suffering that we have to undergo, whether we like it or not. As long as we are bound in samsara, we have to experience suffering. So the attitude should be that we might as well adopt a framework that would enable us, a mental framework that would enable us to tolerate this pain. It is ubiquitous. It is there in our environment, and there are more factors that can trigger pain. There are fewer factors that can bring joy and happiness. So we need to be aware of this aspect of our reality. And based on that, we need to adopt an attitude and enhance an attitude to enable us to tolerate the pain and suffering in our environment. So enhance our pain thresholds based on an acceptance of suffering and hardships. And then enhance tolerance based on reflection on the true nature of reality. So we speak of all phenomena being determined by a network of factors. So there's interdependence that describes the existence of all phenomena, whether it's people or events, whether it is the action of people. Everything is determined by a network of factors. And many of these conditions that cause others to bring harm to you could in fact be outside their control. So there are a lot of factors that trigger his or her harmful actions to you. And a lot of these factors could be outside his or her control. And we do not intend to be angry, but even in our experience, we find that we sometimes manifest anger, although we do not want to be angry. We do not intend to be angry, but sometimes find ourselves gripped with anger in a manner that is similar to us becoming ill without wishing to be so. So same would be kind of applicable to other people who manifest anger and they cause harm to you. And then negative emotions that motivate others to bring harm to you. So we spoke of the network of factors that cause other people to bring harm to you. So there are essentially negative emotions in the mind stream of that other person that are motivating him to bring harm to you. So these are the things that we should reflect on and then see that any action, maybe it's harmful to you, is actually triggered by a network of factors, and then analyze what those factors are. And the more we analyze this, the less strong would be our urge to kind of react negatively to that harm, and the more likelihood that we'll be patient in light of that harm when we faced with that harm. So our tolerance would get enhanced by reflecting on the true nature of reality. And We generate tolerance towards injuries from others by, again, deploying this kind of thinking. So those who cause us harm are possessed. So their mental state, they're bringing harm to us because they are influenced by some negative emotions that are manifested in their mind stream. So they're possessed by negative afflictions in their mind stream. They act out of ignorance. So as it is said, we should forgive the perpetrators of harm or evil, for they know not what they do. They are under the influence of their negative afflictions. And we should regard our enemies as precious, for they would, through their negative actions, through their harmful actions, they give us the rare opportunity to practice tolerance and accumulate merit through practice of tolerance. So that's how you enhance your tolerance in the light of injuries coming from other people. So, what are the specific techniques? So we can think about different kinds of reasonings to develop patience, to enhance our patience, enhance our practice of tolerance. So we'll look at those different reasonings. But before we do that, I think we'll just hop back to our discussion on fear and anxiety. And then we'll look at the nature of fear and anxiety, and then see what is the causal process which triggers fear and anxiety. And then we'll look at the techniques to control fear and anxiety, along with the techniques to develop patience and tolerance as an antidote to anger. So we'll look at these two together. So let's skip to, okay, dealing with fear and anxiety. So here we'll speak about the nature of fear and anxiety. So we've already seen what the nature of fear is, and then we'll also look at what different forms of fear there are. There's an entire spectrum of different kinds of mental states which are very similar or in the nature of fear that manifest in our mind stream. So we'll look at that spectrum of fear. And we'll look at the causal process of fear and anxiety and approaches to control fear. And we'll also look at the approaches to control anger. So, nature of fear and anxiety. So, fear, as we've already briefly seen when we started our discussion of anger. So, fear generally arises as a response to a danger, to a threat, which is of a specific nature. So, this threat is obvious, it's clear and present, as opposed to it being some sort of interpretation. And it is a natural response to, fear is a natural response to some active or perceived threat. So the source of fear or worry has to be obvious, it has to be clear, it has to be present. For example, when we are confronted by a ferocious looking dog, it's very possible that the dog may attack you and bring physical harm to you. So your physical safety is being threatened. So in the light of that threat, it's very natural to develop fear in your mind stream. Or when confronted by your unhappy boss asking you to explain a mistake that you made. Again, you walk into the cabin and you don't know how the boss is going to react to some mistake that you made. And there's a very, very intense apprehension that he might actually humiliate you, abuse you. With that apprehension, that would manifest as fear. Or maybe facing a robber at night, again, a very clear and present kind of threat to your physical safety, to your material safety also. If the robber is there to deprive you of your money. So in the light of all these threats, you generate fear. So fear is a response to an imminent danger, and the source of that danger is obvious, clear, and present. As opposed to anxiety, where anxiety is some sort of a vague sense of apprehension. The source of this apprehension is not clear and present. It's not obvious. So it's kind of it's a response that is very diffuse. It's of course unpleasant, and the sense of apprehension is vague. So it is an emotion that is associated with some sort of a sense of impending danger, and that danger is not necessarily obvious to the observer. It may or may not manifest. So the apprehension may or may not manifest. The threat may or may not manifest. So it's often a response to an imprecise or unknown threat. So let's look at the examples and it will be clear. So you develop anxiety, such as the uneasiness that you might feel while walking down a dark alley at night. You have this apprehension that there's somebody loitering around, there's somebody lurking in the dark, somebody is going to just come and threaten you. So that anxiety is there. The threat is not present there. It's not obvious. It's not clear and present. But you're kind of interpreting that experience and generating this sense of unease in your mind stream. The anxiety could be because you have an upcoming exam or some sort of a public talk that you're supposed to give, and the anxiety could manifest months ahead of the event. So you're kind of feeling uneasy about an upcoming exam. You think that your preparation would not be adequate. The question paper is going to be tough, and you're going to kind of not perform well in the exam. When you're up for a public talk, you have this apprehension that the public will not receive it positively. Because of that apprehension, there's anxiety. The anxiety then, in a way, kind of sabotages your ability to put on a good show. It takes on all these. The apprehension takes on the form of anxiety in these kind of events also. Although the threat is not evident, it's not obvious, it's not clear and present. A likely separation from your could be work colleagues, could be a partner. That also leads to anxiety. Impending illness. So we're all very familiar with this kind of anxiety in the recent past because of COVID and all that. The fear of contracting an illness leads to, or the apprehension of contracting an illness takes on the form of anxiety here. Again, you might fall ill, you may not fall ill, but you have a very intense apprehension in your mind. So that's the nature of anxiety. So what is the spectrum of fear? So there are these different forms that this apprehension could take. Anxiety, as we said, associated with some sense of an impending danger where the source of that danger is not clear, it's not present, it's not evident, obvious. Fear where the threat is realistic, and it would be wise in some situations to just back off. Then there's timidity, and what timidity is that it indicates a kind of lasting tendency, a prolonged tendency, protracted tendency to show fear easily. There's panic where there's an upsurge, a sudden upsurge of acute terror. But then there are phobias or phobic anxiety where the phobia is triggered by particular situations or objects. For example, people have fears of enclosed spaces, claustrophobia. That fear could be triggered by superstitions. So very widespread in our communities here. For example, if some black cat crosses your path, then it triggers all kinds of apprehensions. Superstitious fears, obsessions, recurrent and unwanted thoughts which are hard to resist. So you're obsessed with washing your hands 100 times a day, fearing that there are microbes on the table that you touch, the books that you touch, and those will get transferred to your hand, and you need to wash them frequently, but not as frequently as 100 times a day. That becomes an obsession. Preoccupations, repetitive, agonizing over ideas. So you're kind of preoccupied with this thought of failure in the exam. So it becomes intense, and you no part of your energy is kind of used in preparing for the exam. You're just preoccupied with this prospect of failing in the exam. There's paranoia, can include a fear that somebody is against one for no good reason. So the threat is perceived in this case. The danger is purely a perceived one, not an actual one, imagined one. So paranoia and aversion. So all these are kind of at some level triggered by aversion, but the aversion that is being spoken of here, it's a specific kind of aversion. It's a strong dislike for some sensory experiences. Rather than fear, it's just a strong dislike. So there's aversion for foods, certain kinds of foods, so or odors. So there's this fruit called durian, which is popular in Southeast Asia. It has a very strong odor. A lot of people have a dislike for that odor. So aversion. So these are different kinds of forms that apprehension could take on. So this kind of defines the spectrum of fear. So what are the causes of fear and anxiety? So let's look at the presentation of the causes from the perspective of Buddhist psychology, where the emphasis is not on just mere repression or suppression of the manifested fear or anxiety, but getting to the root of that manifestation of those kind of negative mental states, and eliminating the root, cutting it off the root itself, so that they do not manifest at all. So slightly different as opposed to the approach that is followed in regular psychology. So fear could be caused by strong attachment, and the attachment could be either towards persons or things. And this point is brought out in a verse in the Dharma. In the section on affection, or Priya Varga. So what does this verse say? It says that from craving springs grief, and from craving springs fear. For one who is wholly free from craving, there is no grief. Whence then fear? So craving is the root source of fear. So even in the previous session, we've seen how craving leads to negative actions, like taking up unskillful actions, like taking up weapons with the intention to harm other people. So craving leads to grasping, grasping leads to acquisition, acquisition then leads to ascertainment, ascertainment then leads to desire and pleasure, desire and pleasure then leads to attachment, attachment leads to possessiveness, possessiveness leads to defensiveness, and then that defensiveness manifests in all kinds of negative forms. So it could manifest even as in the form of fear. So it's all triggered because of the strong attachment that we have towards our personal things or to persons. And then the other cause is that we anticipate consequences of unwholesome actions. So we engage in unwholesome deeds, and there's something within ourselves which triggers this thought that, okay, I'm going to have to face the consequences of these unwholesome actions. So this anticipation is related to some sort of sense of regret, or it could also be guilt. and it takes on an obstructive aspect in the sense that it creates intense apprehension and uneasiness, and you can compromise your creativity, your actions, your energy, your creative energy. But it could also have a positive, constructive aspect. So you're anticipating consequences of negative action. That can take on the form of what is called a moral fear, or shame and embarrassment at your unwholesome actions. And this shame and embarrassment then prevents us from engaging in similar unwholesome actions in the future. So it serves as a basis for spiritual discipline, moral discipline, and responsibility in the future. So it could have both positive and negative effect, this anticipation of consequences of unwholesome actions. So these are the two main causes. So strong attachment to persons or things, or anticipation of consequences of unwholesome actions. So the first one, strong attachment to either persons or actions. What are the conditions for the emergence of fear? So there's attachment to one's own self. So because of that attachment, there could be situations where we perceive a threat to one's life. In some cases, it could be exaggerated. In some cases, it is real. We perceive a threat to our health, our physical wellness. Then there could be situations where we perceive a threat of losing, there's a threat of losing one's job, or threat of losing one's reputation. All these kind of threats then trigger a strong desire for self-preservation, which is it's central to our attitudes. Yeah. So apart from the drive for self-preservation, the desire for power, lust, envy or jealousy, and pride are intimately related to the emergence of fears. So they are all kind of related, and we just briefly seen how they could be related. The other condition for the emergence of fear, clinging to some valuable object. So because we perceive that object to be very valuable and precious, and we kind of think of it as a source of our pleasure, it becomes we become possessive about it, and we because of that possessiveness, we generate this defensiveness. We want to defend it against any kind of loss or theft. So because of that excessive clinging to valuable objects, that could become the source of our fear, the cause of our fear. So we have to defend against loss of these valuable objects. Thieves and robbers can become a serious threat to one's life. Strong attachment to a person. So we are attached to some person, and if the person happens to fall ill, and the person is seriously ill, then our concern for his health, his or her health, might turn into fear. Fear of death, maybe, for death of that person. And the possibility of separation through death then causes a lot of anguish and anxiety and fear. So this is how this strong attachment to persons or things can become a cause or a source of fear. The second one, the anticipation of consequences of unwholesome actions. So a person who has done wrong things fears that other people talk about him. It's very natural for us to kind of have this anxiety or fear that other people are talking about the unwholesome actions that I've engaged in, especially in close communities. That fear that apprehension, this anxiety is very pronounced. We are disturbed by the possibility that we may get punished by law for our unwholesome actions. These fears are there, but also when the person is alone, is retreated to his room, is thinking about his unwholesome actions, then the fear disturbs him. The fear that disturbs him is different from this healthy sense of shame and fear. So there's shame and fear that these unwholesome actions can trigger. But it's also possible that the shame and fear could be positive aspects, could have positive aspects to them. It's also possible that the person who is generating this fear because of his unwholesome actions, he generates a negative kind of fear. And then we have so from here we can see that the person who is engaged in unwholesome deeds has fear of being reproached by others. He's also has a fear of self-reproach. So when he's contemplating, he's thinking, he's introspecting, then his mind stream becomes a little unsettled and leads to apprehensions and anxiety or fear. So there's that fear of self-reproach, and then there's the fear of punishment. So if you're in violation of some law through your unwholesome action, then you could face some punishment. And then there's this fear of being reborn, fear of rebirth in the lower realms, in the lower worlds. So these are the 4 different kinds of fears that the sutras talk about. So there's the fear of self-reproach, or Atmanuvad Bhaya. So Bhaya is fear. There's the fear of others' reproach, Para Anuvad Bhaya. And then there's the fear of punishment, Danda Bhaya. Danda is punishment. And the fear of lower worlds, lower unfortunate rebirth. So Durgati Bhaya. So these fears could actually, again, have some positive effect also. So it could spur the person to abandon evil and practice some wholesome deeds. So this is the fear that is caused by anticipation of consequences of unwholesome actions. So this fear, as we had seen, could have negative aspects, could have a positive aspect also. In some cases, the fear leads to very hateful and discontented mental states, especially when the fear takes on the form of a very negative kind of remorse. It's called kaukritya in Sanskrit. This negative remorse, which takes on the form of an agitated, disturbed kind of conscience, it could become an obstacle to your practice. So essentially, it is talking about some sort of a sense of guilt. So guilt essentially just talks about being punished. Guilt, things about punishment for your negative actions. So it's not really thinking about how those negative actions could be purified and how that can be rectified and remedied. So guilt is being preoccupied with the possibility of punishment purely, as opposed to regret, which factors in that there is a possibility of remedying that negative action. So in case of manifesting guilt, that can become an obstacle to our practice. And fear, this kind of fear is associated with hateful and discontented mental state, and that because it leads to a disturbance in our mental state, it opposes stability of mind, and it leads to all kinds of restlessness and worry, and it compromises our practice. On the other hand, there are these aspects of fear, or rather these mental states which are mixed with fear. The mental state of shame or self-respect, self-esteem, and the mental state of embarrassment or modesty. So shame is an avoidance of misdeeds on account of oneself. So one has this sense of self. So some self-esteem, self-worth that you have, and that would get compromised, that would get challenged if you engage in a negative action, in a misdeed, and hence you avoid that misdeed. So shame is actually an avoidance of misdeeds on account of oneself, and has the function of acting as a support for restraint from misconduct. Uh, just like embarrassment also, it also has the function of acting as a support for restraint from misconduct. But in case of embarrassment, you generate a wish to avoid the misdeed on account of others. So, what would your teacher say? What would your friends say? If I engaged in this negative action, what would my teachers say? What would my friends say? Uh, that is what triggers this mental state of embarrassment. So, shame and embarrassment, fear that is mixed with shame and embarrassment could have a positive impact. And in fact, we need to cultivate shame and embarrassment to strengthen our conscience, which would then mean that we'll pay attention to uh, spiritual moral discipline, ethical discipline, uh, and the practice of other uh, positive mental states affiliated with ethical discipline. So shame and embarrassment are positive aspects, and these could be mixed with fear. So what are the causes of anxiety? What brings about anxiety? Uh, so there's this uneasiness that we experience internally, uh, and this uneasiness is related to the our mind kind of thinking about a possibility of something bad happening, rather than a manifest immediate threat or a clear evident threat. You imagine maybe a threat. Uh, you think that it is possible that something bad will happen to me, uh, maybe in the immediate term, or in the near term, or maybe in the long term. And because of that state of mind, because your mind kind of conjures of this possibility of something bad happening, your mind becomes uneasy, and that takes on the form of anxiety. So, for example, you're walking in a dark alley at night, and there may be no one in the dark alley, but yet you have this apprehension that you're going to be harmed by a stranger. So that apprehension that manifests in your mind stream is anxiety. So anxiety stems from your mind's interpretation of possible dangers, not evident dangers, but possible dangers. Uh, so it's some sort of an interpretation again. So for example, a person who's approaching the possibility of a job switch may feel particularly anxious about what kind of work environment will he have in the new company, what kind of a boss would he have in the new company. So his mind is kind of thinking about all these possible sources of discomfort, and it is interpreting the impact of those possible sources of danger, and then that takes on the form of anxiety. And since we are talking about the mind's interpretation being the source of anxiety, the mind's interpretation again is essentially colored by our very deep rooted attachment to the notion of self. So we have this notion of self, of identity, and that is what is coloring our interpretation of possible dangers. And then because of all these, we see that in our day-to-day lives, in our everyday kind of life situations, we confront all kinds of we have all these kinds of apprehensions. Uh, for example, examination fears, um, stage. If you have a upcoming talk, um, even maybe 3-4 months in advance before the event is scheduled to happen, it triggers all kinds of anxiety in you. And there are all kinds of other situations where you experience a lot of apprehensions and anxiety. So the anxiety is is far more pervasive than fear. And because of that, because of the pervasiveness of anxiety, when we think about the pervasiveness of anxiety, we should then provide for the possibility that the underlying cause of this pervasive anxiety is far more fundamental, because it is kind of tied up with some mental interpretation, mind's interpretation. And as we've seen, the fundamental underlying cause is probably this deep-rooted attachment to self, this deep-rooted notion of self or identity that we have. So even things that we deem to be pleasant sources of pleasure can become sources of anxiety, because we fear that that source of pleasure could be taken away from us. So we fear we are apprehensive about its loss, and that triggers anxiety. So all these kinds of anxieties are mixed with attachment, and attachment, as we know, has the grasping at self as the root, as the source. So this kind of gives a broad outline of the causal process for generation of anxiety. So what are the approaches to control fear and anxiety? So there are some general remedial approaches. So it's normal to feel fear and anxiety in some situations, and in fact, it would be helpful to feel fear in certain situations. We all know that fire is an element that is difficult to control, and you need to conduct yourself carefully in the vicinity of fire, especially if there's inflammable material close by. But a child is not aware of it, about the dangers of fire, and because of that ignorance, it's possible that the child plays around in the vicinity of fire. So because we are aware of the dangers, then we take preventive measures to shield ourselves, our physical, take care of our physical safety in those kind of situations. But a person who is not aware of that danger, he'll continue to engage with that situation and episode. The child will continue to play around the vicinity of in the vicinity of fire, exposing himself or herself to getting burnt. So in some situations, of course, fear and anxiety are justified and can be helpful. They're normal. So we need to be kind of aware of that. So in these situations where there's a threat of illness, or there's a threat of you losing your job, or there's poor performance, the threat or anxiety related to poor performance of failure in examination, or you're stressed or apprehensive about your financial resources, there's some financial stress due to constrained finances, or you're apprehensive about arguments with your work colleagues, and maybe even at home. All these are very normal situations that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. And in these situations, healthy amount of fear and anxiety would be very helpful. These could spur us to invest in preventive measures. For example, if there's a threat of illness, then you ensure that you exercise, you pay attention to the food that you consuming, you supplement your food with extra nutrition. So you take all those kind of preventive measures when there's a threat of illness. If you're worried about losing your job, there's fear and anxiety related to job loss. In that case, that fear and anxiety can trigger you to work on enhancing and augmenting your work skills so you do not become redundant in your team. If you're worried about examinations, fear and anxiety, healthy amount of fear and anxiety is essential to help you prepare better for exams. In case of a threat of financial stress in the future, uh, fear and anxiety would help you kind of uh, develop a healthy savings habit. Or if you're worried about anxious about arguments with work colleagues and at home, then you would invest in better communications with your colleagues and your partner. So some amount of fear and anxiety is of course very helpful. So we need to kind of invest in developing better uh, coping skills, um, instead of just wishing that you don't encounter this situation. So that would be very negative. That it's unrealistic also to expect that we would not face any of these situations in our everyday life. There would be no threat of illness, there would be no threat of job loss, etc. So instead of wishing that these things don't manifest, these threats don't manifest, we should all just invest in developing better coping skills. So think about what kind of a coping mechanism you can have uh, to deal with fear and anxiety related to these kind of threats. Uh, you could seek help from other people. Discussions are always useful with your well wishers. And one thing that we need to do is try and identify those problems that we can deal with, those we can master, uh, those we can remedy, and those that we can't do anything about. Whatever we try, there's nothing that we can do to remedy those situations. So we need to distinguish those kind of problems and um, invest energies in dealing with the first kind. In the second kind, it's just best to walk away from those situations. So these kind of preliminary remedial perspectives one could develop to deal with fear and anxiety. Other approaches would be to invest in meditation techniques like mindfulness that helps you with relaxation. But there are more meaningful techniques like this thing called exposure therapy. In fact, even when we look at a possible uh, control framework to control fear and anxiety from the Buddhist perspective, essentially it's about having uh, dealing with, or rather exposing yourself to the source of fear and anxiety, and then developing a proper perspective to deal with that uh, fear and anxiety. So exposure therapy, what does it help you do? Uh, Here you expose yourself to whatever frightens you, whatever is the source of your apprehension, your anxiety, your fear or phobia. You expose yourself to those situations till the point that you're able to handle it, or maybe even get used to it. So initially, it would not be realistic to expect that you'd get used to those situations, but gradually, you start off by mm, being you expose yourself to this situation, and initially you would be your target should be to reach a state where you're not as uncomfortable with that situation as you were in the past, and then gradually progress and intensify your exposure to a point that you actually get used to those situations. And then when we confront our fear resolutely for long enough, it will diminish gradually, of course. Our exposure needs to be controlled and gradual. Yeah. In certain situations, for example, um, you have uh, anxiety related to fire, for example. Uh, it's wise to kind of just imagine uh, the the situation and then imagine the response that you would engage in. the response that you would manifest, instead of actually lighting up a fire and then putting yourself in that situation there physically. So your exposure needs to be controlled. You need to be mindful about the risks of exposing yourself to the situations. So, and then it also has to be gradual. You gradually kind of intensify your exposure. The earlier you confront your source of anxiety or phobias, the better the chance of yourself you getting to a position where you can control it. And of course, you need patience and determination to deal with it. So these are approaches that are recommended. So let's see how we can develop a mechanism to deal with fear and anxiety using the Buddhist psychological perspective. So here we essentially talk about two approaches. So dealing with the emotional manifestations of fear and anxiety. Um, so an approach which would probably just help you with addressing the manifest forms of fear and anxiety, not the root of fear and anxiety. So here what you do is you develop your capacity to observe these emotional manifestations. Uh, and your practice of mindfulness, you cultivate your mindfulness meditation practice that would help you to observe the manifestations of these emotions. Um, and the mere fact that you're able to observe them then will give you some element of control over it. Yeah. And then you could use techniques like projection. So you just imagine someone else who's close to you, manifesting fear and anxiety, and then imagine the unpleasant physical transformation that it triggers. That fear and anxiety will trigger some sort of physical transformation. Just imagine that unpleasant physical transformation that triggers, and then based on that projection, then you can resolve that I'll not let myself fall under this way of this kind of fear and anxiety, because it leads to these kind of unpleasant physical transformations. So you could use these approaches of observation, uh, mindfulness mostly, and projection. So you do some analytical meditation, you use this technique of projection, and then you cultivate this resolve that you will not let yourself fall into this way of this kind of fear and anxiety. Uh, the other approach is to develop insight or wisdom to prevent fear and anxiety, where you actually go down to the root of these uh, emotional states, and then use that insight to ensure that you're not overwhelmed by these negative emotional states. So you use that wisdom to ensure that you do not get paralyzed in the light of fear and anxiety. Your creative energies don't get compromised. They don't shrink. They don't contract. And then you also use that insight to eliminate those negative states eventually. So how do you do that? Then you think about proper antidotes that you can deploy to address fear and address anxiety, to ensure that when you're faced with similar situations in the future, they do not elicit the normal or regular usual responses of fear. So developing insight. So we'll see how we can do that. So developing insight to prevent fear and anxiety from overwhelming us. So like we had seen at the start of the discussion, that both fear and anger as well as anxiety actually are a derivative mental state, derivative of the root poison of aversion. So there's attachment, aversion, and delusion. So fear and anxiety are both kind of a derivative afflicted states of the root poison of aversion. And anger also is a derivative of aversion. Anger is an outward projection of aversion. So there's an outward expression. When you're angry, there's an outward expression of that anger. It could take on the form of some sort of a physical action, or maybe even verbal abuse, harsh speech. So there's an outward projection of aversion when you manifest anger. But yeah, so underlying that anger is an aversion. And when we speak of fear, fear actually is aversion that manifests inwardly, and that leads to contraction of your internal energies. So in all fearful situations that we are faced with, in these fearful situations, we are faced with the prospect of having to deal with stomach and experience that we are disinclined to. We do not like facing those kind of experiences. So just think about these examples. So in the first case, we are disinclined to stomach criticism or humiliation from a terror boss. So your boss summons you, and then you develop fear that he's going to humiliate you, he's going to hurl all kinds of abuses at you, he's going to criticize your work. So this that criticism that that you'll have to kind of stomach in that fearful situation. Um, in the face of being confronted by a bully or a robber, there's physical pain, the likelihood of physical pain that you may have to deal with. In the case of some sort of a perceived unwholesome action or transgression, there's a possibility that you will have to deal with infamy or disgrace. Or in the case of job loss, you will have to deal with material loss, financial loss. So these are different fearful situations, and we are faced with the prospect of having to stomach criticism, stomach physical pain, stomach disgrace, or stomach material loss. While these, the likelihood of criticism, physical pain, disgrace, and material loss, these are all proximate causes of fear. These are what would actually trigger fear. What you really fear is that all these fearful situations will make you feel somewhat small. So you have this notion, conception of your self, your identity. And in relation to the sense of self that you have because of these possible situations, fearful situations. For example, if your boss hurls abuse and humiliates you in front of your work colleagues, then you fear that your stature amongst your work colleagues would be diminished. So you fear that these situations will make you feel small. So your sense of self, your I, and the identity is being threatened here. And then you'll have to settle for some sort of a shrunken I. So you have your imagined version of I, and that is being threatened and is going to be replaced with some sort of a diminished I. So it's natural then that that will trigger fear and anxiety in you. But a more healthy attitude would be to just be willing to, be patient, just be a little more tolerant in these kind of situations, and accept this perceived shrinking of I. So it's not necessary that the situation, the fearful situation, will essentially lead to your sense of I shrinking. You're just interpreting it and you're perceiving that there would be a shrinking of I. So just be willing to accept this perceived shrinking of I, with the upside that you could benefit from the creative potential that the fearful situation may offer. So, you walk into your boss's office fearing that there will be criticism and possible humiliation, and you walk in with apprehension, and there's a lot of fear. That fear could sabotage your interaction with your boss, and it's possible that your boss is still open to some sort of creative suggestions from your side. Uh, and because of all this fear and anxiety that is manifested in you, because of all this perceived kind of threats, you compromise your ability to contribute creatively to that situation. So if you are willing to accept this perceived shrinking of I, then there's an upside that you could benefit from the creative potential that that situation offers. So instead of just being occupied with preservation of this notion of self, your identity, you provide some leeway for advancement, some creative engagement with the situation. So reject preservation for advancement. So this is the kind of psychological. You need to cultivate this kind of an attitude to deal with fear and anxiety. So uh, that would uh, give you uh, some sort of a framework to deal with fear and anxiety. So we'll just wind up our discussion with the uh, approaches that we can deploy to deal with anger. So just let's go back. So just like we spoke of developing healthy attitudes to deal with fear and anxiety, to work on the sense of I, uh, and then being open to uh, digesting some uh, digesting this shrinking of I, perceived shrinking of I, and being open to the creative possibilities that that fearful situation offers you. You make these mental adjustments and evolve a different kind of psychological perspective to deal with the situation. Similarly, when we are faced with situations that would trigger anger in us, we could use these reasonings to evolve a psychological perspective, uh, good psychological attitude to uh, enhance our tolerance and patience to deal with the anger that could manifest in us. So the first reasoning is that okay, you're feeling justified in having cultivating anger towards the source of pain to you. So since the aggressor has inflicted, so you say that since the aggressor has inflicted harm on me, I'm totally justified in being hateful and angry toward that person. It's a normal kind of thought process. So because the person is the victim, is the recipient of some harm that's come from some other person, so you feel that you're justified in in being hateful and angry towards that person. So if that is the case, then just think about it. Think about the fact that there are several factors that give rise to this hurt that you're experiencing. So there are animate and inanimate conditions and causes that have caused this hurt. But our immediate tendency is to kind of single out the animate factor, like the person who's responsible for the hurt or the harm, and we hold that person responsible, and we hold some grudge against that person. Then, uh, so when we compare this with a situation where there's harm coming to our physical well-being through an illness, we do not hold any kind of grudge against the illness, the disease that causes us this harm. So, why should we hold a grudge against the source of harm, where the source of harm is animate. So the person will still kind of justify being hateful and angry towards the source of harm by saying that it is different because inanimate factors do not have the desire to injure us, whereas in the case of animate factors, there's this deliberate desire to bring harm to us. So that injury arises in the case of inanimate factors, the injury arises without deliberation, without their choice. So in that case, we can develop a counter reasoning, counter argument, saying that even when a person inflicts pain on us, the harm is out of our control. The harm is out of the control of the person who is inflicting pain on us. There's a network of factors that have come together to finally manifest as this physical pain that you're experiencing. So the person who is bringing you harm is also compelled by other forces like his afflictions, his negative emotions, his delusions, his ill feelings, etc. So those are the real causes that bring harm to you, and those causes, they do not have a deliberate desire to harm you. Those causes also kind of manifest their results without their choice. So, if you use this argument, then it will help you temper your anger towards the source of injury. You could use a different reasoning here, where if there's harm, if inflicting harm upon others is, you think that, okay, the harm that is being inflicted, if that harm is somehow an inseparable part of the person's nature, or it is not part of his essential nature. So in case it is a part of the person's essential nature, that harm that is bringing on to you, then there is no point in holding a grudge against that person, because it is the nature of that person. The harm is the nature of that person, the harm that you're experiencing. So it would be like begrudging fire because it burns. So harm is the nature of that person, inseparable, indivisible, inalienable part of that person's nature. There's no point in begrudging that person in that case. If on the other hand you think that that harm is not an essential part of his nature, is not his essential nature, but it is due to the nature of some circumstantial condition that this anger has manifested, maybe due to some other factor, then there's no point in holding that person accountable. So in case you continue to hold that person accountable, then it's like begrudging clouds that overcast the sky. So it's just an adventitious temporary kind of development. The sky gets obscured by clouds, but it's not forever obscured by clouds. The obscuration by the clouds is not the nature of the sky. So even in this case, if the harm is not part of the person's essential nature, then there's no point in developing anger towards that person. If you do, then it would be like holding a grudge against the clouds for making the sky overcast. Reasoning number 3 would be that okay, if someone hits you with a stick, then the real agent that brings you harm is the stick. So you should direct all your anger towards the stick. So you would say that it's the underlying cause, the motivating force, the driving force that we should feel anger towards. Now, if that is the case, then the motivating factor that makes that person hit you with the stick is actually anger or hatred. So it should be the negative emotional state of afflictive state of hatred that you should then direct your anger towards. So we should not single out, um, there's this direct cause of harm, which is the stick, and the root underlying cause of the harm, which is the afflictive state of hatred in that person's continuum. So instead of looking at these two causes, we are just singling out the intermediary, the animate source of that harm. So we should not single out the intermediary. We should be aware of the underlying motivating factor. And all our painful experiences are consequences of our negative deeds from the past. So we should be aware of that. So whatever experience of pain that we are having, those uh, experiences have been triggered because of the negative actions that you committed in the past. So these contributing factors that have resulted in the pain that we are experiencing, primarily because your body has arisen, generated in the form, in the nature that it has this capacity to feel the pain. And your body has that capacity because it was born out of the forces of karma. And that karma was essentially created by your own actions in the past, your own afflictions from the past. So whatever pain or suffering that you are experiencing is because of your own negative actions. We'll stop in under 2-3 minutes. Yeah. Reasoning 5 is that we should be grateful with the person who's inflicting harm upon us, because it gives us an opportunity to practice tolerance and patience. It gives us the opportunity to accumulate merit through the practice of patience. And then think about if we retaliate, the futility of this retaliation. This retaliation not only is of no use to the other person, in fact, it harms the other person. It also is destructive to our own interests, because you compromise your practice of patience, you compromise your practice of bodhicitta, you you kind of compromise the effectiveness of your merits. So, and then also this action of retaliation or revenge that you engage in, it could lead to a vicious circle of violence. And then another reason, so in case of someone being disrespectful or being harsh in a speech towards you, using insulting words and so on, he's using these insulting words, but there's no danger of any physical injury to you. So why should you be angry towards that person? So you could say that if I do not react to this abuse, this humiliating words that the other person has used towards me, then it's possible that because that humiliation was done, you were publicly humiliated, it was done in the presence of other people, then the other people would dislike you. So I'm entirely justified in feeling angry towards that person. So if others dislike you because of the harsh speech that the other person has directed towards you, even in that case, it's not going to cause any serious downfall to you in the future, um, or even in this lifetime. It's just empty words. And then you could still persist saying that I'm still justified in reacting angrily to the person, is I need to retaliate. Otherwise, it will hinder my worldly gains. It compromises my reputation. It hinders my successes and achievements in the future. So then you have to think that these worldly gains cannot be carried into the next life. Whereas if you retaliate and you engage in, revengeful actions, then it's going to create a lot of negative karma through your angry acts. And that karma is what you will carry into the future, not the worldly gains that you acquire. So it's the karma that's going to go with you in the future. So it's going to lead to loss for you in the long term. Or you would still persist by justifying, saying that I need to react, otherwise my ability to accumulate material wealth gets compromised. If I acquire material wealth, then I can not only live comfortably, but I can also engage in acts of generosity and charity and earn merit. It sounds like a valid justification, but then you can think about all the negative actions that you're kind of engaging in to accumulate that wealth, and that negative action far outweighs the effect of the few wholesome deeds that you may be able to do with the increased material wealth. So we think about all these kind of different reasons to enhance our practice of patience and tolerance to deal with anger. So we'll stop here. We'll just end the session with a short dedication. So just compose yourself, just maybe close your eyes and just reflect over the discussion that we had today. That we saw what is the nature of anger, what is the nature of fear and anxiety. And then we saw the causal flow that generates anger, also the causal flow that generates fear and anxiety. And then we also saw some psychological adjustments that we could make to deal with both anger as well as fear and anxiety. So just take a moment to recollect those. And then assure yourself that through participating in this discussion, you've accumulated some merit, and let's direct that merit. So due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a completely enlightened Guru Buddha and lead all sentient beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that does not arise and grow, and that and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Okay, with that dedication, we'll stop here. So thank you everyone for your time. Short or scheduled time a little bit. But that's okay. Okay, if you have any questions, we can take them later. Maybe you can post them in chat or email them to me. And in the next session, we can discuss them. Okay, thank you very much. See you.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Venerable. Venerable, can we get the presentation, this one, for a consumption later?
Yes, I'll mail it to you.
Yeah, I think it has some beautiful content. We need more time to think about it. That'll be very helpful.
Sure. Yeah, I can share it with you later.